Hi there, hope you're having a good day and thank you for taking the time to watch this video. So from next week, I'm going to be doing things a little bit differently on YouTube, and I'd like to get your feedback in the comments below on whether you think this is a good idea or whether you'd prefer this. So the way things currently work is I don't upload these videos to YouTube until like Thursday or Friday, and they're often 1 to 2 hours long, which is a long time, and you guys don't have the time on a Thursday or Friday to sit down and watch these videos in their entirety. And the reason why I can't get these videos out earlier in the week is because I spend so long researching these fights. As many of you will know, live betting on the UFC is my speciality. We make a profit on around 70% of UFC events over the last 8 years. And the reason why we're so successful live betting on the UFC is because I put so much time into researching the fights that when a fight is taking place live on a Saturday night, I can predict with a pretty good degree of accuracy how that fight is going to play out based on how both fighters in that contest have performed in the past. And that's kind of the secret sauce to what has enabled us to make so much cash over the years. But because I spend so much time on the fight research, I often don't finish researching a UFC card until very late in the week. For example, it's now, Thursday night. And if we go to the breakdown videos page on my website, you can see that I've still got a couple of fights to research, and these ones will probably take me, a couple of hours each to research, and I'll spend a good chunk of Friday doing that. So, it takes me a while to get through these fights is the point I'm trying to make. So from next week, what I'm going to be doing is uploading 2 to 3 videos a week instead, and they will start dropping on YouTube from Tuesday, where I will just break down 1 or 2 fights per card, or 1 or 2 fights from the main card, and every day I'll drop a new video with 1 or 2 fights in it. So for example, if I was doing that this week, I might drop a video on Tuesday breaking down these 2 fights, and then another video on Wednesday breaking down these 2 fights, and then another video on Thursday breaking down these 2 fights. And who knows, we could even drop a 4th video on Friday with some of the prelim matchups you guys are most interested in. Maybe we could take a vote every week, starting with a video on Tuesday, and you guys could tell me which prelim fights you want me to cover the most in Friday's video, and we could drop that as kind of like a bonus video. And this is just going to be a way for me to get more content out to you guys earlier in the week so that you actually have time to watch it and it's more useful for you. I just think that would be better for everyone. I did try this for a little bit, and what I found is the videos that were featuring fights that weren't that interesting obviously had really low views, and so I thought, you know what, I'm not going to bother doing it like this because these videos aren't barely getting any views. But at this point, I don't really care about YouTube views anymore. The channel growth is super slow. Like, the channel doesn't really grow anyway, kind of stays at the same amount of views. So at this point, I'm past caring. So yeah, I just thought that would be better for you guys. So instead of me chasing the views and going for the higher views, I thought, fuck it, from now on I'll just do things in a way that is better for you guys watching the videos. And I think shorter videos put out earlier in the week will just be better for you guys. It might like kill the channel growth, but at this point the channel's not really growing anyway, so who fucking cares. So yeah, we're going to be doing that from next week. Let me know in the comments below if you think that's a good idea, if you'd like that. And as ever, please hit the like button if you like these videos. They do help push the video to more people, which does help with channel growth, even though it's pretty much non-existent at this point. And subscribe if you haven't already. That would also be really useful. So yeah, we're going to be doing that for next week. So from Tuesday next week, look out for the very first breakdown video dropping. What is next week's card? I think we've got a pay-per-view next week, right? Let's take a look. I'm pretty sure next week is the pay-per-view. Let's take a quick look. Yes, we've got Topuria versus Holloway. Great cards. This is a really great card to start doing things a little bit differently for. So yeah, watch out for the breakdown for Max and Topuria Tuesday next week. Might cover Whitaker, Chimaev in that video as well. So, without further ado, and I don't even know what that means, but we're going to try and keep this video as short and snappy as possible. Let's break down the main event of this weekend's card, which is going to be Anthony Hernandez versus Michel Pereira. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this fight, we can see that Hernandez is the favourite at average odds of about 1.75, which is going to be minus 133 for an implied probability of 57%. If we take a look at the odds on Pereira, he's around an average of 2.08, which is going to be plus 108 for an implied probability of 48%. So Pereira is 31 years old. He's 6'1" with a 73-inch reach. Hernandez, 31 years old, 6 foot tall with a 75-inch reach. So both guys about the same size, and they are exactly the same age. So I'm not going to be betting this fight for the reasons that I'll describe in this breakdown video. But I will say that Hernandez is a very, 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 very tempting bet. I am extremely tempted to bet him. And obviously, by the time you're done watching this breakdown, you'll understand the reasons why I can't bet him. But I have a sneaky feeling that this could be a very easy fight for Hernandez. We don't have the footage, which would give us, a conclusive answer to whether or not this will be an easy fight for Hernandez. But I have a feeling it will be for some of the things that I'm going to go through. So obviously, it's a classic striker versus grappler matchup. If the fight stays standing, you would expect Pereira to do very well. But if the fight were to go to the ground, you'd expect Hernandez to do very well. And so when we're breaking down a fight like this, really the question that we need to answer is whether Hernandez is going to be able to get the fight to the ground and keep the fight on the ground for long enough to win the fight, right, by submission or decision. So if we quickly just go through how they match up when it comes to striking, we'll then spend a lot of time focusing on the grappling, because that's really where this one's going to be decided. So if the fight stays standing, we know that Hernandez is aggressive. He does throw a high volume of strikes, but he's not the best defensively, and he doesn't really have much power in his hands. So if the fight stays standing, you're probably going to see Pereira bouncing around on the outside, chipping away at his opponent from the outside, and most likely outstriking Hernandez. I say Pereira will most likely outstrike Hernandez simply because Pereira is quite a low volume striker at times. He tends to be more of a single shot sniper than someone that puts a lot of volume together. And so with someone like Hernandez, even though he's not as technically skilled or as explosive or as dangerous as Pereira on the feet, he does throw high volume. So when you look at someone like Hernandez in their last fight against Kopylov is able to match the volume of Hernandez on the feet. So as Hernandez is coming forward and attacking Kopilov's kind of firing back, and he's matching that volume and output of Hernandez. Pereira may not be able to do that, so I wouldn't rule out the possibility that Hernandez over the 5 rounds outstrikes Pereira. Early on, he may find it difficult, but if he can keep that volume up and tire Pereira out a little bit, I wouldn't rule out the possibility that Hernandez out-hustles Pereira on the feet, particularly in the 3rd, 4th and 5th rounds. Obviously, we know Pereira's got some big knockouts, some highlight reel finishes on his record, but I do think Pereira is one of these guys whose kind of power and danger on the feet is perhaps a little bit overstated or a little bit overestimated. The reason why I say that is because if we look at his record, we can see that he's finished his last 3 fights pretty quickly, but he's not exactly finishing the highest level or most durable of guys, right? Petrosky, Oleksiejczuk, Pereira, they're not exactly durable. They're not exactly, high-level guys. They're not exactly particularly good defensively. So even though getting 3 quick finishes against those guys is great, I'm not sure if that means Pereira is like super dangerous on the feet, because if we then just go a little bit further back in his career, we can see that for the most part, he's a decisionator. When he faces that slight step up in competition, he struggles to get guys out of there. And I mean, I know that these fights ended late, but obviously they almost went to a decision. And guys like Andre Filio, not particularly durable. Guys like Nico Price, not particularly skilled. I just think that this is perhaps a little bit of positive variance where Pereira's experienced 3 quick finishes, which is great, but for me, I don't think he's particularly dangerous. I don't see him as a guy that has crazy power or super explosive or being super dangerous on the feet. I just don't see it personally. Now, obviously, There is something that's changed between these 3 fights and obviously this group of fights, and that's obviously Pereira switching weight classes. These fights took place at welterweight, and in these fights he stepped up to middleweight. So, a certain group of people may say Pereira is more explosive, more powerful at middleweight than he is at welterweight. But typically speaking, when a guy who is, only 6'1" with a 73-inch reach, which is quite small for a middleweight to be fair, when he goes up a weight class, you'd expect him to be like less powerful, less dangerous when he's facing bigger guys, have less knockout power. That's just a general rule, a general trend. And so I tend to feel like he's probably just got these finishes because these 3 guys aren't very good. And as he starts to face a higher level of opponent against at middleweight, guys like Anthony Hernandez, you'll probably see him revert back to the norm, which will be most of his fights going deep, or at least most of his fights, him not getting finishes in. So I don't feel Pereira is particularly dangerous on the feet. That's just me personally. I don't see him as having crazy power like some people. And so that's the first reason why I kind of like Hernandez in this matchup, because over 25 minutes, I think it's going to be difficult for Pereira to keep up with the pace that Hernandez sets. We've seen Pereira slow down in the past, whereas Hernandez is a cardio machine. And so unless Pereira gets like a quick knockout in this fight, I see him struggling. And I don't think he's particularly dangerous, which means I think a quick knockout is quite unlikely. So that's how I see the stand-up side of things and Pereira's path to victory. Now let's focus on what Hernandez does well, how these 2 match up when it comes to grappling, and whether or not Hernandez can get the fight to the ground and keep the fight on the ground. So Pereira is one of these unusual fighters that, I run into, quite often, to be fair, on these UFC cards, where even though he's had a lot of fights in the UFC, just by the way that the cards have fallen, and obviously that's an expression, I don't mean the fight cards, I just mean like, the way life has unfolded for Pereira, he's found himself in this position where he's had a lot of fights in the UFC, and he's actually gone to, a lot of decisions. We've seen a lot of his striking, but he hasn't really fought anyone that has tried hard to take him down. So Pereira's been quite lucky in the sense that he's a striker, he's a very skilled striker, but he hasn't really fought any wrestlers, and certainly not any really good wrestlers. If we take a look at his record, Pereira's a striker, Alexejuk's a striker, Petrosky's a grappler, but the fight lasted 1 minute, so we didn't get to see his takedown defense tested. Pons, Zanibio striker, Filio striker, Price striker, Williams striker, Imadeev striker, Diego Sanchez was shot, Tristan Connolly, a bit of everything, but he took the fight on just a few days' notice, Danny Roberts striker, and then this is obviously his debut. So we can see he's had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 fights in the UFC. He hasn't fought a strong grappler, which is kind of crazy. And this means we don't really know very much about his takedown defense or ground game. In actual fact, we don't know anything about his takedown defense at all. If you look at UFC stats and we pull up Pereira's stats page, you can see that his takedown defense is 94%. And this is where blindly betting based on stats can get you into a lot of trouble. I see these guys on Twitter that have like these AI models that use stats to try and predict the outcome of MMA fights, and they'll feed stats like 94% takedown defense into their models, and not realize the stats are only useful when they're interpreted correctly. And the reason why someone like Pereira has most likely got 94% takedown defense, because he hasn't fought anyone that's very good at taking people down. At the end of the day, if I fought a bunch of 5-year-olds, my takedown defense would probably be 94% as well, because I'd like to think the 5-year-olds weren't skilled enough to take me down. But if I fought a bunch of NCAA Division 1 level wrestlers, my takedown defense would probably be minus 1,000%, because obviously, I get put on my ass very easily. So, with Pereira, he's one of these interesting situations where we don't really know where he's at with his grappling, which is crazy after having 11 pro fights. What I would say about Pereira, and the reason why I like Anthony Hernandez so much in this fight, is that anytime we've seen Pereira on the ground, he's looked extremely bad. And so what I want to do is just show you a little bit of footage of his ground game. 2 seconds, guys. I can see, you can actually just, there we go. You can actually see, you know, anytime we've seen him on the ground, he's just looked very, very low level. So we're going to show you a little bit of footage. Let me just snap that by there. There we go. I'm going to show you a little bit of footage of Pereira's ground game. And you can see that if Hernandez does obviously manage to get him to the ground, this could be a very difficult fight for him. So, the last time we really saw any of Pereira's ground game was all the way back in July 2021, which is quite crazy, right? That's over 3 years ago now. So you got to go all the way back to 2021 to see the last time we saw anything of Pereira on the ground. And when we saw him on the ground, it wasn't good. The problem is, obviously, a lot can change in 3 years, right? So Pereira's only 31 years old. He's very young for a middleweight. Back when he fought Nico Price, he only would have been 27, 28 years old, something like that. He's likely going to have improved a lot since then. And so it's very, very tricky. Very, very tricky. Very, very tricky. So we see a takedown entry here from Price, but he shoots the initial entry quite high up above Pereira's hips, which enables him to get this underhook in play on the right side. And you can see that Price isn't doing the best job of getting in deep on these legs. So Pereira is an athletic guy, creates a nice wide base against the cage, and he's doing a pretty good job of stuffing this. But we know Hernandez's relentlessness, his chain wrestling, his ability to get in on the legs is a lot better than Nico Price's. So you can see Pereira's just got that overhook on the left side, preventing Nico Price from dropping down and getting in deep on the legs. And Pereira's pretty comfortable here till he gets his back off the cage. All hunky-dory, all good stuff. So if we then skip through, Price again tries to get the fight to the ground after another couple minutes here. We can see Price gets the body lock, but isn't able to get in deep enough on the legs to try and hit an outside trip off that body lock. And so, once again, Pereira gets that underhook in play on the left side, defends the takedown, no problem, and Price has to give up on that particular takedown attempt. So if we skim through, that's pretty much it for the first round. So here in round 2, you can see Price wants the fight on the ground, so he damn near pulls guard there where he goes down, and then, you know, crazy kind of backflip shit from Pereira. All good stuff, all good stuff. So you don't really see too much defensive wrestling from Pereira in this round. I mean, there's a bit of a half-assed takedown attempt from Price, but again, it's not the best entry. Way too high up above Pereira's hips. You can see it's practically neck height, that takedown. So again, that's not really telling us much because Hernandez is a far better offensive wrestler. And if we go at the beginning of round 3 here, Price tries to open up Pereira's lower body for the takedown entry with that kind of flurry of punches. Again, this is probably the deepest takedown entry of the fight because you can see he gets his hands connected briefly, very, very briefly for like a second around the legs of Pereira. But Pereira quickly manages to break his grip, gets that overhook in play. And again, similar to earlier in the fight, Price doesn't get the takedown. So if we keep skipping through, by that point you can see the odd half-assed takedown attempt comes from Price, but nothing too major. And so really speaking, in Michel Pereira's 11-fight UFC career, that is about all we've got to work with in terms of learning about Pereira's takedown defense. So prior to that, if we go to, then you've got the Williams fight. That was a stand-up fight, and a really good trick you can use. You probably know this already, but if you just click into each individual fight on UFC stats, it will show you how many takedowns their opponent attempted. So this is really good for speeding up research, so that if you were trying to learn about, you know, Nico Price's, or if you're trying to learn about Michel Pereira's takedown defense, and you didn't want to watch all these fights, because obviously that would be very time consuming, you could look at like the Zelim Almabaev fight, and you could see, oh, okay, so if we go to takedowns, Almabaev didn't shoot any takedowns in that fight, so it's probably not worth watching that fight if I'm trying to learn about Pereira's takedown defense, right? You could look at the Chaos Williams fight. Oh, okay, Chaos Williams didn't try and take him down, so it's not worth watching that fight either. Whereas if you go to the Nico Price one, you can see, Nico Price attempted 2 takedowns. Obviously I'll learn a little bit about his takedown defense from that fight. So that's just a nice trick to use. So obviously there were no takedowns in these 2 fights. We've just seen that. If we look at the Diego Sanchez fight, it says that Diego attempted 6 takedowns in this matchup, but by this point in Sanchez's career, he was absolutely shot. He was shooting takedowns from on the back foot. They weren't the best entries, and so they don't tell us a whole lot about Pereira's takedown defense, because Hernandez is a far better offensive wrestler than an absolutely shot Diego Sanchez. And the thing is, this is one of the reasons why Pereira's takedown defense stat of 94% is so good. It's simply because he's fought these guys like Nico Price and Diego Sanchez, who are bad offensive wrestlers, that beef that stat up, because he's defended so many of their takedowns, but he hasn't defended takedowns or fought anyone from a guy that was actually good at offensive wrestling. So it's a very misleading stat. If we look at the Tristan Connolly fight, though, this was Pereira's second fight in the UFC, and you can see that again Connolly attempted 6 takedowns, didn't get any of them, which again would skew his stat, because we know Tristan Connolly's quite a low-level guy. He was also a very small fighter, and I think he took the fight on very, very short notice. The thing is, though, you do see a bit of grappling from Pereira in this fight. So if we pull this one up, when it loads, here we go. So you do see a little bit of grappling from Pereira in this one. Obviously, the issue with using this fight to make betting decisions off or form opinions from is, again, it was a very long time ago. This was 5 years ago now, and a lot can change in 5 years. Pereira has improved tremendously in that time, and so this isn't that useful, but it's all we've got, and ultimately all you can do is make the best decision possible with the information we've got available. And so, well, kind of have to use this. So I'm not going to spend time showing you his takedown defense, because Connolly's takedown entries aren't really any better than Nico Price's, and I don't want to drag this out. You've already seen a bit of footage on Pereira's takedown defense more recently against Price. So instead, we're just going to focus on Pereira's ground game here. So here we can see he pulls guard on a guillotine, which is always a bad idea. And this is 2 minutes 10 seconds left to go in the round. And if we hit play here, you can see obviously he has to give up the guillotine. He doesn't get it. But now in round 1, 2 minutes 10 seconds left to go in the round, he's on his back. So we're just going to skim through. We want to keep this breakdown video as short as possible. And you can see Pereira looks very, very weak off his back, to the point where, Connolly's able to advance from half guard into mount. Now then Pereira manages to stand back up, but initially he was looking very, very weak off his back. Then in this sequence, you can see Connolly almost ends up in top position off a guillotine, loses a scramble, and the round is up. If we just skim through, what I do want to show you here as well is, now we did say Pereira has slowed down in some of his past fights, And while Pereira's improved in all aspects of his game since 2019, there's no doubt about that. What is interesting to me in this fight is that Pereira gas is bad. So while I'm talking you through this next sequence, just pay attention to Pereira's body language, his breathing patterns, his movement. You can see he's gassed very, very bad here. And we're only 7 to 8 minutes into the fight. I mean, look at his body language as he backs up there, takes a big, deep breath. Look how slow his hand speed is. Look how sloppy he looks here. And so what's interesting to me about this is, you know, you do get these guys that have really good cardio when it comes to striking. But if you force them to grapple, they can gas out very quick. I mean, perhaps Sean O'Malley is a good example of this, right? When we see him in a stand-up fight against guys like Marlon Vera, he can go hard to 25 minutes, no problem, without slowing down. But then when he's fought guys like Peter Yan, Merab Dvalishvili, that's when you can start to see O'Malley slow down a lot, right? I'm not saying Pereira's like that. All I am saying is perhaps Pereira is one of these guys that you can wear out and tire out if you use a grappling heavy game plan on him. Who knows? But he's certainly gassed here against Connolly. The thing is, you know, Pereira's improved so much since this fight. We just don't know where he's at right now and how much grappling's going to impact his performance, what his takedown offense is like. But what we do know is this is probably the hardest he's been forced to grapple. Well, it is the hardest he's been forced to grapple in his UFC fights. And he looks pretty terrible. So in this third round, there's 3 minutes 40 seconds left to go. And Pereira essentially pulls guard here to defend his back from being taken. Or doesn't pull guard, sorry. He just rolls to his back to defend his back from being taken. And Connolly here is in side control with 3 minutes 35 seconds left to go in the round. So if we just hit play, and again, I'll just skim through, you can see that Pereira just looks very, very, very weak off his back. Now, bear in mind, Hernandez is a relentless grappler with cardio for days. Very high-level grappler, much bigger than Connolly. And, you know, at this point, you know, Connolly's been able to hold Pereira down for over 2 minutes. And you can see Pereira basically got taken down. 3.5 minutes left to go in round 3, and spent pretty much the entire remainder of the round on the ground. So, you know, when you look at how these two guys match up stylistically, and how I see this fight from a betting point of view, based on past performances, this is a great fight for Anthony Hernandez, because the footage that we have seen of Michel Pereira isn't great. Yes, guys haven't been able to take him down, but he hasn't fought an offensive wrestler anywhere near the level of Anthony Hernandez. We know Hernandez has got the cardio to spam takedowns hard for 25 minutes without slowing down. His grappling control is pretty good. He's absolutely relentless. And the real reason why I like Hernandez a lot in this fight is, again, I don't think Pereira is that dangerous on the feet. Yes, he's the more technical striker, but I think the probability of him knocking Hernandez out on the feet is actually pretty low, which gives Hernandez time to work. It gives Hernandez to maybe eat a shot to get inside and grab a hold of Pereira, or to maybe wear Pereira down a bit in the clinch and maybe not have success taking Pereira down into that second or third round. You know, I don't think this is one of those situations where Hernandez is going to be at constant risk of being knocked out on the feet. You know, will Pereira outstrike him? Probably. But I don't think there's tons of danger on the feet for Hernandez. I could be completely wrong. Let me know what you think. But Hernandez is just a very tempting bet for me. You guys watching this video know me by now, though. I'm not going to make assumptions on things unless I can get really good odds, okay? So when we look at the odds on Anthony Hernandez, you know, he's currently around about a 1.74 favourite. That's an implied probability of 57%. You know, say, for example, Pereira's takedown offense is really good and his cardio is decent. This is obviously going to be a very difficult fight for Hernandez. So without having 100% clarity or confirmation on what Pereira's takedown offense is like, I don't think betting Hernandez this weekend is a particularly strong position at an implied probability of 57%, even though I think Hernandez most likely takes Pereira down and dominates him this weekend. But for me, the way I look at this is, I don't want to gamble, right? Every week we get hundreds of football matches to bet. We get, you know, 10 to 14 UFC fights to both pre-fight bet and live bet. And we make a profit on everything that we do. We make a profit on everything that we do by overwhelmingly stacking the odds in our favour. We have a big edge now in football. live betting, now that we fixed the latency issue, we know we're going to make a profit pretty much every week in live betting. And on pre-fight bets, we also grind out profits most months, and we do very well over the long term. And we do well on everything that we do by not gambling, ultimately. You know, every once in a while I'll place a bad bet and I'll take on more risk than I should, or I'll let my guard down and I'll gamble when I shouldn't. But for the most part, we're pretty disciplined. We're pretty good at sticking to our game plans and strategies. And I feel that whenever you place a bet, you know, unless you're getting really, really good dog odds, you know, whenever you're placing a bet and there's a big gap in information, you're always gambling. You know, you're always gambling, because for all we know, Pereira could have the best takedown defense in the history of the UFC, right? He could be Jose Aldo 2.0 for all we know. And so at an implied probability of 57%, I just don't think it's smart to bet against Pereira potentially being able to keep this fight standing. So if he does keep the fight standing, he's got a really good chance of winning. I just think it's pretty unlikely he's going to be able to stop Hernandez from taking him down. And that's why I think Hernandez is very likely to win. He's my lean. That's why I think he's a good bet. But let me know what you guys think. In terms of the over-under on this one, I think that it's very likely going to go deep. So what I find interesting about the odds on this fight is, you know, you see odds of like 4.4 plus 340, you know, 2.95 plus 195 on the fight to go, you know, into those 4th and 5th rounds. I think it's pretty likely the fight goes deep, to be honest with you. You know, I know Pereira's last 3 fights have ended very quickly, but if you go a bit further back, when he was facing a higher level of opponent, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of his first 8 fights in the UFC went into the 3rd round. And if you look at Anthony Hernandez's record, you know, again, it's a bit of a mixed bag. Half his fights end pretty quick. Around half, maybe 40% of his fights go into the 3rd round. But again, when you look at the kind of guys that are getting finished, you know, Kopylov took the fight on really short notice. Shabazian's got very bad cardio. You know, finishing Barrio is pretty impressive, to be honest, because Barrio's a tough dude. But then, you know, Josh Fremd was able to go the distance. Vieira gaspard and adrenaline dumped. You know, Holland is fucking Kevin Holland. I just have a feeling that this fight is quite likely to go deep. And the odds are quite generous on that. I think that over 1.5 rounds is a pretty good bet. And I will probably be betting that. Like 1.50 minus 200. I think that's quite likely to hit. Simply because I don't think either of these guys are crazy dangerous. I don't think Pereira's got crazy knockout power. And I don't think Hernandez is crazy dangerous on the ground either. I think what Hernandez is very good at doing is taking guys down and just wearing them out to the point where they can't defend themselves anymore. But Pereira can likely defend himself for 7.5 minutes. So this is a pretty good bet. And I wouldn't be surprised to see the fight go into the 3rd, 4th, 5th rounds. You can get pretty good odds on that. But the over 1.5 rounds, I think it's a pretty solid bet this weekend. So, yeah, I'll probably be betting that. You know, it probably will be a bit of a sweat. Don't get me wrong. Both guys will be going for it. But, yeah, I quite like that. In terms of most likely outcome, I think most likely outcome is probably Hernandez inside the distance. I think he will probably wear Pereira down and submit him. But the odds on Hernandez by decision are kind of crazy. Like, say, for example, Pereira's takedown defense is reasonably good. Not amazing, but reasonably good. And say his cardio is reasonably good. You know, you could see a situation where, you know, Hernandez struggles to get Pereira down in the early rounds. Maybe struggles to get him down in some rounds. Or wins enough rounds with his wet blanket style of grappling to win a decision, but maybe doesn't get Pereira down for long enough or puts him in bad enough positions to get a finish. So, yeah, I quite like Hernandez by decision. I won't be betting it because, you know, I don't have very much faith in Pereira's cardio. But I do think that this fight going deep is more likely than the odds are suggesting. I could be wrong. But I just don't feel either of these guys are like crazy dangerous. That's just me personally. Let me know what you think. So yeah, I hope you found that useful. Now it's time we move on and break down the next fight, which is going to be Rob Font versus Kyler Phillips. Now obviously we do have a bet on this fight, kind of, right? We've got a parlay from last week, a 2-leg parlay. The first leg of the parlay was obviously Temba Garimbo, who beat Nico Price last week. The second leg of the parlay is Kyler Phillips. But what's really cool about the bet on Phillips is we got him at pretty good odds. His odds have declined a lot now. I think we bet him at about 1.50 minus 250 last week. And his odds have got absolutely smashed. Now they're all the way down to 1.22. So yeah, we bet him last... I can't remember what day it was. It was Thursday, Friday, or Saturday. It was towards the end of last week. Okay, 1.36, something like that. So yeah, we've obviously got a you know, Phillips is the second leg of our parlay, along with Mr. Temba Garimbo. So hopefully Phillips comes through for us this week, and I'm obviously going to be breaking down the reasons why I think he will win this fight. So, like as always, when the odds move a lot, I'm going to break this fight down based on the odds that we bet Kyler Phillips at, not what the odds are now. Because at these odds, I wouldn't touch Phillips. But I think we bet him at about, let's say 1.37 at worst, right? In that parlay. Because the odds we got on Garimbo and Phillips are like 1.80 minus 250. If you do want to get access to my pre-fight bet, you're watching this on YouTube, just click the link in the description below. And my pre-fight bets are all here. Here you go. There's the pre-fight betting chart. So, odds have declined a lot on Phillips. So we'll break this fight down in the context of what the odds were, because obviously if you're watching this and you're part of my community, you've probably parlayed Phillips with Garimbo sometime last week. Okay, so Rob Font, 37 years old, 5'8", with a 71.5-inch reach. Phillips is 29 years old, 5'8", with a 72-inch reach. So both guys pretty much the same size, but we can see there is a very big 8-year age gap between these two. So statistically, the younger fighter wins around 67% of the time when there's an 8-year age gap in a fight. So we can see the implied probability of 1.37 is 73%. So that's not enough for us to just blind bet that stat with the age gap and turn a long-term profit. So we need to see something in the stylistic matchup for us to make Phillips worth a bet here. And I think we've got plenty. So the first thing we've got is that this fight is taking place at bantamweight. So we know that the lighter weight classes are all about speed, reflexes, and athleticism. And we know that, generally speaking, fighters in the lighter weight classes decline earlier in their careers than the heavier weight classes. So 37 years old for a bantamweight is pretty fucking old. And on top of that, Rob Font has got almost 30 pro fights, and we've seen him get rocked, wobbled, and dropped in many, many, many of his recent fights. So it does appear that Font's chin is starting to go. And if you watch his fights against guys like Marlon Vera or Davison Figueiredo, his last one, it's got to the stage with Font where it doesn't appear to take very much to rock him or wobble him or drop him. His chin does appear to be declining quite bad. Obviously, Kyler Phillips is powerful and he's explosive. He doesn't have many knockout wins on his record, but he is one of these guys that is unorthodox. He's difficult to read. He covers distance very quickly, and he does throw a really diverse range of attacks. So this guy will pose a threat to Rob Font. There's no doubt about it. The main reason why I like Kyler Phillips in this fight is not just because of Font's age or the fact that he's getting chinny, the fact that he is on a decline, but it's the fact that he's quite one-dimensional. So when you look at a guy like Rob Font, for me, he's the kind of guy that is bringing a knife to a gunfight, because essentially all Rob Font does is plod forward and look to outbox you. And he's a pretty good boxer, but he doesn't really shoot takedowns. He doesn't really throw many kicks. He's just one of these guys that stalks you around the octagon and looks to outbox you. When you look at Kyler Phillips, he's just a much more diverse fighter. You know, he can box, he can throw kicks, he can take you down. He's very unorthodox. He moves very well. He's very explosive. He's bringing a lot more weapons to the table. And so Phillips is one of these tricky guys who likes to bounce around on the outside, chip away at you from the outside with a really diverse range of attacks. But that gives him a lot of options because he's got the element of surprise on his side. He's got nice reactive double leg takedowns, nice blitzing attacks. And we know that Rob Font's takedown defense isn't the best. Now, Phillips doesn't grapple tons in his fights. He doesn't grapple super hard. But if he's struggling in this matchup on the feet against Font, he does have the wrestling that he can use to take Font down. And Font doesn't really have the takedown offense or ground game to stop him. If you go back and watch his fight against Davis and Figueiredo, he gave up a lot of cheap takedowns against Figueiredo in that fight, and he looked pretty weak off his back. Remember, as great as Figueiredo is, he's old as fuck as well, and essentially he's a flyweight. In Phillips, he's facing a young, hungry, up-and-coming bull who's making big improvements from fight to fight, who's got good reactive double leg takedowns. If a guy like Figueiredo can take him down, someone like Phillips can absolutely take him down as well. So for me, this is just one of those fights where Font only has one way to win. He has to win a boxing match, whereas Phillips has got so many other ways to win. You know, he can chip away on the feet with his more diverse attacks, his kicking game. You know, he can knock Font out because, Font's chinny at this stage in his career. He could take Font down, steal rounds with takedowns, that kind of thing. So for me, this is a good fight for Phillips. He should win a very high percentage of the time. And I think it's very likely we hit the second leg of our parlay this week on Mr. Phillips. And thank you to Mr. Garimbo for coming through for us last week. We also got pretty nice odds, man. Parlay of Phillips and Garimbo. Odds of 1.80 minus 125. Pretty good odds, in my opinion. So, yes. That's pretty much how I see this fight playing out. Now, in terms of the over-under on this one, the odds are heavily favoured to go to a decision. Now, it kind of makes sense, right? If we look at Rob Font's record, he's an absolute decisionator. He's been to a decision in 8 of his last 10 fights. If you look at Phillips' record, he has been to a decision in 4 of his last 5. I will, however, say this. In terms of value, if you really do want to bet the over-under on this fight to make watching it more interesting, I would take the under. I would take fight doesn't go to a decision at underdog odds, simply because the implied probability on this fight to go to a decision is going to be 67%. For me, when you look at how frequently Font gets rocked, wobbled, or dropped, it's quite clear that his chin is getting worse and worse from fight to fight. And while none of these guys have been able to knock Font out, he is at that stage in his career where he's just getting rocked easily. And what you tend to see with guys like Rob Font is, they can go a big chunk of their career without ever really getting knocked out. But as soon as you start to see them get rocked very easily and rocked very frequently, it's only a matter of time before their chin completely goes and then they start to suffer a lot of knockout losses. I think the best recent example we've got of this is Court McGee. If you look at Court McGee's record, I think he's had like 30, 40 pro fights, something like that. And I don't think he'd ever been knocked out in his career up until about 18 months ago. And then when you look at his record, he's been rocked, wobbled, or dropped in like 3 of his last 4 fights, something like that. So he goes his whole career without ever getting rocked or wobbled or knocked out. And then all of a sudden, late stage of his career, when he's declining, that chin goes, he starts to get knocked out a lot. So that's why if you really want to bet the over-under, I would go with fight doesn't go to a decision, simply because I think at these odds, it just gives you the better risk to reward ratio, because with how easily Font's getting rocked these days, it's only a matter of time before he gets put away. And Phillips is an explosive guy, difficult to read. He's aggressive. He fights at a high pace. He does have that killer instinct. He doesn't have a whole lot of finishes, but hey, maybe he gets his first one against a 37-year-old one-dimensional striker this week. In terms of the most likely outcome for the prop bets, Phillips to win by knockout or TKO. The odds are a bit steep on that. I was hoping they would be a bit better. So failing that, Phillips by decision, terrible odds. Yeah, the odds are a bit dead on that fight for the props. I would give them a miss. But I hope you found that useful. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Sumudaerji versus Charles Johnson. So this hasn't been the most interesting card to research just because I haven't really had that much thinking to do. It's been one of those cards where pretty much all the fights on this card that I've researched, I've kind of gone, yeah, those odds are pretty much where they should be. And there wasn't really a lot of deep thinking to do on these fights from a pre-fight betting point of view. But this one is the one that's given me the most to think about. Because even though I understand the reasons why Charles Johnson is the favourite in this matchup, I do think Sumudaerji is probably the livest underdog on this card. Or one of the livest underdogs on this card. And I think a lot of wiki capping has probably gone into the odds. What we know about the MMA betting market is very few people that bet this sport do actually do proper research. And a lot of wiki capping goes into fight research. And so, a lot of wiki capping goes into how people make their betting decisions in terms of, they will work from hazy memories. They will work from what they think they know about Sumudaerji or Charles Johnson. They'll scan through their MMA records to kind of jog their memory, and they'll look at the MMA records. They'll look at the guys Sumudaerji's won and lost against, the guys Charles Johnson's won and lost against, and they'll form an opinion based on win-loss records. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, I will explain to you why I think Sumudaerji is one of the livest underdogs on this card. So we can see that Johnson is the favourite at average odds of about 1.44, which is going to be minus 227 for an implied probability of 69%. And if we take a look at the odds on Sumudaerji, he's around an average of, say, 2.85, which is going to be plus 185 for an implied probability of 35%. So Johnson is 33 years old, 5'9" with a 70-inch reach, and Sumudaerji is 28 years old, 5'8" with a 72-inch reach. So both guys are about the same size, and we can see Johnson is a bit older, but doesn't really mean anything in the context of this fight, because even though it's a lighter weight class, Johnson's actually getting better from fight to fight. He is actually improving. So if we go back to talking about why I think wiki capping has had an influence on this matchup and the odds, or why wiki capping's had an influence on the odds on this fight, it's because if you look at Johnson's record, it's quite impressive. This year he's picked up 3 wins against 3 really solid fighters. Josh Van's obviously excellent. Jake Hadley's no picnic. Maxim is a decent fighter as well. So wiki cappers will look at Johnson's record and they'll be like 3-fight win streak against 3 really solid, credible opponents. Johnson's looking good here. They'll then look at Sumudaerji's record and they'll go, hasn't fought in almost a year, lost to Tim Elliott, who's not great, and I mean lost to Matt Schnell. That's red flag city, right? Matt Schnell's totally shot. He's on a steep decline. How could a guy like Johnson that has picked up wins against 3 really solid opponents this year, and I would argue all 3 of these guys are probably better than the 2 guys that Sumudaerji's most recently lost to, and they'll just kind of look at the MMA records of both guys and they'll be like, well, Johnson should win this easily based on the MMA records, and perhaps they're right, perhaps I'm overthinking it. But when you look at the fight footage between these two, it's actually not a bad stylistic matchup for Sumudaerji, and I think he could do pretty well here. So, in terms of how these two match up stylistically, obviously they're both primarily strikers. I know technically Johnson does have a base in wrestling, but he very rarely tries to take his opponents down. Now, if Johnson did fight smart for once and did come into this fight with a grappling heavy game plan, I think he would do really well, because Sumudaerji's takedown offense isn't great, and he's at a very low level on the ground, which is why he's been submitted in his last 2 fights. So even though Johnson's not crazy dangerous on the ground, he's a decent offensive wrestler when he puts his mind to it. And because Sumudaerji is so easy to take down, so bad on the ground, Johnson's going to have a big edge on the ground. The thing is, Johnson never shoots takedowns, so we've got to assume this will be a stand-up fight, if past performances are anything to go by. And in a stand-up fight, I think this is close to 50-50. For me, if this fight stays standing, Sumudaerji is the more technical striker out of the two, and he also lands harder, more damaging, more impactful shots. Sumudaerji is one of these guys who's got good footwork on the feet, good movement. He's got that sniper style of striking where he's very accurate, throws nice crisp straight punches down the pipe. And we know Johnson is a slow starter. He quite often loses the first round, takes until the second round to warm up. And when he does warm up, he's very good. He's got a decent leg kicking game. He's a decent boxer. We saw him cause Josh Van a good amount of problems in his last fight. But the thing is, he's not as fast as Sumudaerji. He's not as technical. And Sumudaerji hits pretty hard. He's good defensively. He's got good movement. So if this fight stays standing, I'm struggling to call it. I think it will be very, very close. And that's why I think these odds are pretty off, in my opinion. And I think a good amount of wiki capping's gone into the odds. Like, from my perspective, you know, I wouldn't expect there to be very much grappling in this fight because neither of these guys ever tries to take their opponents down. So I don't know how Charles Johnson is commanding an implied probability of almost 70% in a stand-up fight against a guy that might be a better striker than him. It's a very, very interesting fight. Remember that you know, Sumudaerji lost these fights through his grappling, not his striking. So if this fight stays standing, I think it's definitely closer than the odds suggest. So from a betting point of view, my lean is definitely Sumudaerji here. I won't be betting him because he's one of these guys that is such a low level on the ground. If Johnson runs into trouble in this fight and just actually commits to trying to get the fight to the ground, he should get Sumudaerji down easily and he should be able to control him easily. I don't personally like betting guys like Sumudaerji that have huge holes in their skill set that their opponent is capable of exploiting. But from a value point of view, you'd be crazy to bet Johnson in this odds range, in my opinion. And Sumudaerji is live as hell this weekend. So yeah, Sumudaerji is definitely my lean on this one. Now, in terms of the over-under, we can see that Johnson, very much a decisionator. If we look at Sumudaerji's record, he is not. However, I do think it's pretty likely this fight goes deep, simply because Charles Johnson isn't a dangerous fighter. Yes, he's got the odd finish here, the odd knockout here and there, but for the most part, he's more of a volume striker. Sumudaerji is dangerous on the feet, but Johnson's very tough, very durable, so it won't be easy for Sumudaerji to get him out of there. So because out of the two, Sumudaerji is the only guy with like probable finishing power, but he's unlikely to get a finish because of how damn tough Johnson is, I do think it's reasonably likely this fight goes deep. Again, I wouldn't bet on the fight to go to a decision because the odds are pretty steep and Sumudaerji has got no ground game at all. But I do think it's more likely fight goes to a decision, and gun to my head, I would prefer to have money on the over than the under. Most likely outcome, you know what, if you do want to bet a prop on this fight to make watching it more interesting, Sumudaerji by decision is very interesting. All I will say is, in percentage terms, the odds on Sumudaerji to win by decision aren't that much better than Sumudaerji to win moneyline. So rather than getting cute with the odds, betting on a highly specific outcome like Sumudaerji by decision, if you really want to bet this fight to make watching more interesting, you're probably just better off taking Sumudaerji moneyline. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Jake Hadley versus Cameron Smotherman. Really triggered about this fight, actually, because I literally just finished researching Hadley versus Haystand when the tweets came through that Haystand had pulled out. But here we are. Cameron Smotherman is stepping up to take this fight on 3 or 4 days' notice. So let's take a look at the odds. Do we even have odds yet? We don't even have odds yet. Wow. Okay. Let me just refresh. Maybe they've been added since I started this video. Okay, we do have odds. Okay, cool. So Jake Hadley is the favourite at average odds of about 1.21, which is going to be minus 476 for an implied probability of 83%. If we take a look at the odds on Smotherman, he's around an average of 4.50, which is going to be plus 350 for an implied probability of 22%. So Hadley is 28 years old, 5'7" with a 70-inch reach. Smotherman, 27 years old, 5'9" with a 69-inch reach. So both guys about the same age, about the same size, nothing too major going on there. Now, at this point, we've got to be realistic. Guys that step up on less than a week's notice very, very, very rarely win in the UFC. I don't have the actual stat, but I'd guess if I had to estimate just watching the UFC every week, I'd bet that guys that step up on less than a week's notice win less than 20% of the time, which is a pretty, interesting point, because if we look at the odds on Hadley and we look at the odds on Smotherman, they carry an implied probability of about 22%, right? Which reflects, the fact that guys that step up on less than a week's notice don't win very often. So we don't know what kind of shape Smotherman is in. Very difficult to come off the bench on 2, 3, 4 days notice, make a UFC debut. Hadley is also not an easy style to face because he's aggressive, he's very well rounded, he's a good technical striker, he's skilled on the ground, he's mean, he's nasty, hits reasonably hard, dangerous submission game, and so yeah, it's no picnic for Smotherman making his debut this weekend. Having said that, Smotherman isn't bad. In his past fights, his cardio's looked pretty good. His takedown defense isn't the best, which will probably get him into trouble against Hadley, who's a decent grappler. But his cardio's decent. He's reasonably well-rounded, reasonably technical striker. This is a good stylistic matchup for Hadley. He's the more technical striker on the feet. Throws a higher volume of strikes. He's obviously got a full camp behind him. Better grappler. Very likely to win this matchup. Not much more to say on that one, really. We don't have any odds on the over-under or the props yet. This fight was only announced today. If you do want my opinion on the over-under or props when we get the odds, just hit me up on my Discord, link in the description below. When the odds get released, just dive in the Discord, ask me. I'm online pretty much all the time, so I'll see your message and we'll get back to you. But for now, yeah, Hadley should get the job done here. He's better than Smotherman everywhere. So now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Darren the Damage Elkins versus Daniel Pineda. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see both guys are in that even money odds range. And if you shop around, you can bet both guys at pretty much the same odds, which is going to be 1.91, which is minus 110 for an implied probability of 52%. So Elkins is 40 years old, 5'10" with a 71-inch reach. Pineda, 39 years old, 5'7" with a 69-inch reach. So both guys about the same size, about the same age. Elkins a little bit longer and taller. Pineda smaller, more muscular, more compact, but nothing too major going on in terms of X factors, other than the fact that both these guys are very old. They're both very much on a decline. We've seen evidence of that in their recent fights, and they are both they are both definitely in the tail end of their career and declining in every single way imaginable that you could see a fighter decline. I also at this point just want to give a bit of praise to the UFC for the matchmaking here. I think this is a great fight. I'm very critical of the UFC these days just because as a business, as a promotion, as a sport, if we consider the UFC to be a sport, the UFC has declined so much since I started watching it 20 years ago, and I do criticize them heavily for this. I think Dana's making a lot of bad business decisions these days, but I do love fights like this. I loved Tim Means versus Court McGee recently, and I love this fight. I don't want to be seeing, these, guys in their late 30s, guys in their 40s face these young, hungry bulls and getting destroyed. I like it when the UFC match up these older guys together because it's a fair fight. We know that these older guys very rarely beat young, hungry bulls. So why even make the matchups in the first place? Put the old guys in there to fight each other, and then it's a fair fight, right? No one wants to see an unfair fight. So this is a very fair fight. This is a good fight. This is an interesting fight. So how do these two match up from a stylistic point of view? Well, when you look at both of them, obviously they're both on a steep decline. They're both totally shot at this stage in their career, but there is no doubt that Darren Elkins is significantly more shot than Daniel Pineda, probably because of all the wars he's been in and all the damage that he's taken. At this stage in Elkins' career, he's flatter on the feet than ever before. He, doesn't have any physicality to his grappling. His reflexes are totally shot. I mean, his defense was never the best. He was never the best at seeing the shots coming, but now it's like non-existent. And the real issue with Elkins these days is that he's not durable anymore. So Darren Elkins built a career from basically rockying his opponents. So Elkins was always bad defensively, was never dangerous on the feet, but he would have this never say die attitude, this never quit attitude, and he was insanely durable. So Elkins would just rocky guys. He was one of these guys that wasn't particularly good at anything, but he would just keep coming forward, keep attacking his opponents. He would just block punches with his face, take a lot of damage, and just ultimately wear his opponents down to the point where he could then kind of use his toughness and his cardio and his work rate to overwhelm them. And so the problem that Elkins has got in 2024 is, whereas earlier in his career he could take those big shots and he could take that big damage and keep coming forward, he can't really take those shots or take those damage anymore. And now in 2024, at 40 years old, he is getting rocked, wobbled and dropped very easily. I was talking to Ghoul in the Discord earlier this week, and he was saying, because I said Darren Elkins is one of the toughest guys in the history of the UFC. Like, I can't think of many tougher guys than Darren Elkins. Like, he's got the nickname Damage for a reason. It's because he's taken so much fucking damage in his career, right? And when you think about tough guys in the UFC, Darren Elkins has got to be in the top 5. Diego Sanchez is probably up there. You probably put Mark Hunt up there. There's a lot of tough guys, right? But Elkins is up there. Nate Diaz, they're up there, right? Tony Ferguson's fucking up there. Elkins is in the conversation. But Ghoul said, he got wobbled a couple times by Ryan Hall. That's fucking red flag city, right? And that just shows the father time's a motherfucker. And when you've taken as much damage as Elkins has in his career, the chin doesn't last forever. It's a finite resource. We're definitely seeing that. And so for that reason, Daniel Pineda is my lean this weekend, because power is the last thing to go, and Daniel Pineda still hits reasonably hard. We saw him get respect from Nathaniel Wood and Alex Caceres on the feet in his last 2 fights. And because Elkins is so fragile at this stage in his career and Pineda is still so powerful, I think there's a pretty good chance Pineda knocks Elkins out early. Now, having said that, Darren Elkins has built a career off beating guys like Daniel Pineda. So I don't know if in 2024 Darren Elkins is capable of beating Daniel Pineda, but I do know that Daniel Pineda is the exact kind of guy that Elkins beat pretty much his entire career. And let me explain to you what I mean by that. So Daniel Pineda is one of these guys that hits very hard on the feet, and he's a very dangerous submission grappler. I mean, we even saw him cause Nathaniel Wood problems on the ground in his last fight. And we know Wood is a young, hungry bull, right? So Pineda's a dangerous guy, but he's also a bit of a glass cannon in the sense that he's very dangerous early in fights, but if you can weather that early storm, get through the first round, Pineda is a fighter that gasses very bad. And sometimes he's got the heart to push through and keep going like he did against Nathaniel Wood. And other times he just completely capitulates, arguably like he did against Andre Philly or Cub Swanson, right? He would just capitulate and he would just throw the wave the white flag, throw the towel in mentally. And Darren Elkins has built a career off beating guys like that. Darren Elkins has built a career off weathering that early storm, dragging guys into the second or third round where he can swing momentum in his favour and take over. So this is great matchmaking. This is a great stylistic matchup from the UFC because Pineda's quite well positioned to exploit Elkins' biggest weakness because Pineda's dangerous and Elkins isn't durable anymore. But then Elkins is quite well positioned to exploit Pineda's biggest weakness because we know Pineda fades very hard in rounds 2 and 3. And Elkins still has that bulletproof mentality, that strong mentality, that, you know, incredible toughness and that strong will to win. So even though his body cannot support his mind anymore, his body can't match his mind, you know, his body can't hold out as well as his mind needs it to in order to, you know, stay alive for long enough to win these fights. He's gonna fucking try. He's gonna fucking try. He's still got that strong will to win. There's no quitting Elkins. For me, the reason why I do finally lean towards Pineda, though, is when you look at Elkins' last 2 fights, particularly the Jonathan Pierce fight, because if you look at the TJ Brown fight, Elkins uses a grappling heavy game plan to win that, but I don't know what the fuck happened with TJ Brown in that fight. You know, he gave up a lot of cheap takedowns, looked very weak on the ground. It was a terrible performance from Brown. If you look at the Jonathan Pierce fight, Elkins really lacked physicality on the ground, whereas Pineda is a very, very strong guy. I just think that in grappling positions, I wouldn't be so sure Elkins would have the edge because he's never had the best offensive wrestling and he is starting to look quite physically weak on the ground. Pineda could overwhelm him and big brother him on the ground. Now, they will reach a point where Pineda's too tired to do that in this fight, but will he already have put 2 rounds in the bank before that happens? Because even in the second and third round, he was still beating Nathaniel Wood in the scramble at times, and Wood is going to be, you know, a lot more difficult to beat in the scramble than a 40-year-old Darren Elkins. So for that reason, I lean Pineda, but because Pineda gas is very bad, because Elkins has built a career of beating guys like that, I wouldn't bet this fight, but I do think Pineda is more likely to win. So in terms of the over-under on this one, I do think that fight doesn't go to a decision is quite a good bet. I would be very surprised if this fight didn't go to a decision, simply because Darren Elkins can't take damage anymore, and Pineda's dangerous both standing up and on the ground, and because if Pineda does start to get tired, Elkins will go for the kill with either ground and pound or rear naked chokes like we saw from him in the TJ Brown fight. So yeah, it's one of those fights where I do think it is very likely to end inside the distance, and I will probably be betting that. I would be surprised if this one went to a decision. I'd be pretty damn surprised. And sorry, just to bring up their records, just to kind of show you what's been going on with these two. So 4 of Elkins' last 6 have ended inside the distance. And if we look at Pineda's record, obviously these 2 are grappling matches. 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, 4, 5 of his last 7 have ended inside the distance. I just think at this stage in their careers, I either see Pineda gassing out and getting stopped late, or I see Elkins getting knocked out or submitted early when Pineda's fresh. And I think it's quite unlikely we get any other outcome. So in terms of the props on this one, most likely outcome, I think, is going to be Pineda by knockout or TKO. Even though if you look at his record, yeah, probably knockout or TKO. What's Pineda inside the distance? 2.5. Yeah, you're much better off taking that, because in percentage terms, it's not all that different than Pineda by knockout or TKO. But then in percentage terms, it's not a whole lot better than in money line. Yeah, do you know what? There's so many ways this fight could go. I wouldn't even fuck about with props. I would just stick to the fight not to go to a decision. I know the odds aren't great, but yeah, I would just do that. So, yeah, I hope you found that breakdown useful. So, now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Matheus Nicolau versus Azu Almabaev. So Almabaev was the first name that jumped out at me as a potential bet on this card. I thought he could be a very good bet. I still think he's most likely to win. He's definitely my lean. I definitely think he's the better bet out of the two, but I don't love his odds. Obviously, his odds have declined a bit since I researched this fight at the beginning of the week, but I wouldn't bet him at these odds personally. So if we take a look at his odds, which are 1.50 minus 200 for an implied probability of 67%, we can see that Nicolau is 31 years old, 5'6" with a 66-inch reach, and Almabaev, 30 years old, 5'4" with a 65-inch reach. So we can see both guys are about the same age, about the same size, nothing too major going on there. So where do we begin with this one? Two very well-rounded fighters for a start. So even though these two are very well-rounded, in the context of this fight, I would look at it as a striker versus grappler matchup. If the fight stays standing, Nicolau has the advantage, in my opinion. If the fight goes to the ground, Almabaev has the advantage, in my opinion. But both these guys are reasonably good strikers and reasonably good grapplers. They're both very well-rounded. It's not like the Hernandez versus Pereira fight, where striker versus grappler, and Hernandez is going to have a big advantage on the ground and Pereira is going to have a big advantage on the feet. It's not like that. These two can hang and compete, you know, in all areas, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Almabaev outstrike Nicolau and Nicolau outgrapple Almabaev. It's that kind of fight. But from their past fights, Almabaev should have the edge on the ground. Nicolau should have the edge on the feet. So let's start off in terms of how they look when it comes to striking. So one thing that stood out to me with Almabaev's striking is that he is a bit raw on the feet. Guys from Kazakhstan in the UFC, usually pretty technical, usually pretty well trained. But Almabaev is very raw. His striking defense isn't the best. I don't know if this is because he's so focused on getting the takedown. He's kind of wide open to counter strikes. But his striking's a little bit sloppy. Like, he'll throw naked spinning back kicks and stuff with his hands down and come very close to walking onto big counters. He doesn't read his opponent particularly well. His striking's just not great. Nicolau is a good counter striker. He likes to bounce around on the outside, chip away at you from the outside. Doesn't throw like a super high volume of strikes. He's not like crazy dangerous on the feet. He's not like powerful or anything like that. But for me, he's more technical than Almabaev and will probably outstrike Almabaev for a good portion of this fight. Now, when it comes to grappling, things get interesting because Almabaev is one of these guys, like an Anthony Hernandez, who's got the cardio to spam takedowns hard for 15 minutes. But we know so many of these guys that do have, you know, an abundance of cardio, which enables them to grapple hard for 15 minutes. So many of these guys lack the physicality to go with it. And you could argue that Anthony Hernandez has that problem. Last month we were talking about Merab Dvalishvili having that problem. You know, usually there's a trade-off where, you know, you either have amazing cardio and grappling that lacks physicality, or you have an abundance of physicality but then you lack the cardio. And a guy like Andrei Petroski is a good example of that. This is what makes guys like Khabib Nurmagomedov unicorns, because they have the combination of top tier cardio with top tier grappling control and physicality. So Almabaev's one of these guys, great cardio, not the best grappling control. And this is why if you watch his fights against CJ Vergara, Jose Johnson, you do see them have little bits of success on the ground here and there where they'll hit reversals, win scrambles, things like that. So when I look at how these two match up on the ground, it's interesting to me because Nicolau's decent on the ground. He's not the easiest to take down and hold down. He's reasonably athletic. He's got good footwork. He's got good movement. He's good in the scramble. He's decent grappling control himself. He's a far better grappler than both CJ Vergara and Jose Johnson. So where I'm seeing guys like Vergara and Johnson have a bit of success on the ground against Almabaev, you know, Nicolau could potentially make life quite difficult for Almabaev in this fight. Now, the reason why I think Almabaev will still win is because Nicolau does have a tendency to slow down in fights. His cardio is not the best. But Nicolau's one of these guys that slows down in like the second half of the fight. The first half of the fight is very, very good. So Almabaev will likely win this fight because Almabaev is one of these guys that spams takedowns relentlessly for the full 15 minutes, doesn't give you any space to breathe. He's very good in the wet blanket. So even if he doesn't have tons of success with his grappling in this matchup, he is going to force Nicolau to burn through a lot of energy to defend the takedowns, to initiate scrambles, to exert energy to work his way back up to his feet or work out of the clinch if Almabaev is trying to take him down, which he definitely will based on past performances. He'll try and take him down real hard. So we know that Nicolau will fade hard in this fight. But the question for me is, at what point does it happen? Because what we could see in this matchup is a situation where Nicolau wins the first round because his defensive wrestling when he is fresh is good enough to keep the fight standing and keep Almabaev off him and steal the round with some striking. And then Almabaev is very likely to win the third round because by the third round, Nicolau is likely going to be too tired to stop the wet blanket grappling of Almabaev. And so this fight is very likely to be decided by round 2. Does Nicolau have enough gas in the tank to do what he did in the first round and, you know, make it difficult for Almabaev to get him down and rack up a lot of control? Or does he fade early enough in round 2 to the point where Almabaev's wet blanket style of fighting will enable him to kind of backdoor round 2 and win the second and third round and obviously take a decision? You know, I'm not ruling out the possibility that Almabaev could win the first. I'm not ruling out the possibility that Almabaev could outstrike Nicolau. But this is one of those fights where I didn't like Almabaev as much as I thought I would. The odds feel quite steep to me. He probably still win, but when I look at the odds, I don't love them. So, on that note, I think it is time we take a look at the over-under. So, very likely this fight goes to a decision. The odds reflect that. I wouldn't consider the fight not to go to a decision here. Both these guys, for the most part, are decisionators. I know that Nicolau's last 3 fights have ended inside the distance, but prior to that, he frequently fought to a decision. And styles make fights, right? When you look at Almabaev's record, yeah, you know, he's got a decent amount of wins inside the distance, but at the same time goes to a decision a reasonably good amount of time as well. And because both these guys are so well-rounded, you know, both are pretty good defensively. Like I say, Almabaev's not the best defensively on the feet, but then it shouldn't matter because Nicolau doesn't really have the power to make him pay for that. Just think both these guys are well-rounded enough. It's not going to be easy to get either of these guys out of there. Very likely the fight goes deep. So I wouldn't be taking the under on this one, guys. You know, and the odds on the over are tough to stomach in a cage fight to the death where it only takes one shot. And it could be all over. You know, we weren't saying that... you know, his fight against Pereira was particularly likely to end inside the distance, and it did. So anyway, in terms of the props, this is another one where I wouldn't get too cute with it. I think most likely outcome is Almabaev by decision, but the odds are absolutely dreadful. You know, if you're one of these guys that just loves to gamble, maybe look at Almabaev to win in round 3, just because the odds are absolutely huge. And Nicolau does have a tendency to fade in fights and gas in fights. So you could see Almabaev get a late finish. But I don't think it's particularly likely. You know, at the end of the day, when you're betting things in this odds range, you don't need them to hit a particularly high percentage of the time in order to make a long-term profit. But at the same time, I recommend bets like this quite often on these videos. This isn't one of those times where I would recommend something like that and think, you know what, that's quite likely to hit. This is one of those more unlikely times. It's just for the, you know, at the end of the day, some people like to bet on sports for entertainment. You know, Vegas was built on entertainment, right? It's a holiday destination. Vacations is entertainment. Gambling is a form of entertainment for many people. I don't personally find it entertaining to lose money, which is why I only place bets which I can overwhelmingly stack the odds in my favour. But if you like to mix it up, play some bets on every fight to make watching them more interesting. You know, the odds are decent, and I could see it hitting. So maybe you want to go for that. I won't be betting it personally. Something for you to think about. So I hope you found that useful. If you did, if you like these videos, please hit the like button below. The channel growth is so slow. Like I say, these videos are a little bit deep, a little bit long-winded, a little bit boring for most people. So the growth is slow. But the growth is also slow because not many people actually bother to hit the like button. And how many likes you get determines how hard the YouTube algorithm pushes the video. So if you do like these videos, if you want me to keep doing them, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit the like button. It just makes the time I spend more worthwhile. It would mean a lot. And if you could subscribe as well if you haven't already, that would mean a lot too. So have a great weekend. I hope you make loads of money on this card. And I'll be back on Tuesday with a breakdown video for a couple of next week's fights. Most likely that main event, which is going to be a great one between Topuria and Holloway. So thank you very much for watching. I love you all. Take care. See you all very soon. And come Discord, have a little chat with me if you're bored. I'll see you there. Nice one, guys. Take care. Bye.